I am continuing what we started in the Zoom on Tuesday, 4/21, over solving radical equations, possibly two solutions, but definitely including some factoring somewhere along the line. So on Tuesday I did the hardest example with you guys, that was getting a least common denominator. Factoring was included, so finding the least common denominator, multiplying each fraction by the missing term. So we multiplied the left fraction by x plus 1. We multiplied the middle fraction by x minus 1 and x plus 1 because that was what was missing. And then on the right fraction we didn't have to multiply anything because the denominator was the least common denominator. So that was step number 2. Step number 3, I did the distributive property, and that's just bringing this step down. I FOILed my x minus 1, x plus 1, and then on the right side I did not have to multiply by anything. After I've distributed property and FOIL, the next step is to add like terms. So that's this step right here, adding like terms. Once I added like terms, I have to get it in standard form because it is a quadratic, so it has to be set equal to 0. Once I have a quadratic, I have to factor, and because this one had a leading coefficient of 3 out front, I had to do the box method. And review of the box method, multiply the a, c together. That's how I got 36. 3 times negative 12. List the factors of negative 36 that add to be your middle term. And this was our middle term. Then once you factor, then you're going to set each of these equal to 0, getting your solutions. Let me slide this up real quick. And once you get your two solutions, you have to make sure that you go back and check your excluded values. So again, these answers are coming from factoring, setting my factors equal to 0, going back up and checking my excluded values. The excluded values are coming from the denominator, or the least common denominator, setting those equal to 0. So that was a more difficult example, and that is in the notes, but you don't have to redo the notes. So then I listed out the steps for you guys. So first step is to find the least common denominator. Multiply each fraction, there will be 3 fractions in the equation, by the missing term. Sometimes you're using the distributive property, sometimes you're using FOIL. Once you do FOIL or the distributive property, you add like terms. At this point there's no denominator left, because once you multiply each fraction by the missing term, this will eliminate your denominator, so that you don't have a fraction left. That's the whole goal, is to clear the fraction. Once you do FOIL distributive property, add your like terms, you'll be set up into a regular equation at that point. If it's a quadratic, it's set equal to 0. If it's a linear, then you just go ahead and solve like normal. Factor the quadratic and then solve by setting each part equal to 0. So now I'm going to do question number 2 from the notes that I sent you guys. I'm going to do number 2 and number 3, and then I'm going to set you guys up with one to do on your own, and then I will send you those answers as well later Thursday. Okay, so question number 2 from the notes. Looks very similar to the one that we did together, except it's not nearly as difficult. I did the harder factoring with you guys via Zoom the other day so that you didn't struggle too much. Okay, so question number 2 from the notes. So first I'm going to check my left denominator. I have x minus 1, so that's going to become part of my least common denominator. This is step 1. My middle fraction has a 1, so I don't need to write that down. And the right fraction I need to factor. And that factors into x minus 1, x plus 1. And remember, I said that I was having a hard time on Google Docs writing an x squared, so I did put it below just so you could see what it should look like. So then my right fraction, or the right side of the equation, has x minus 1 and x plus 1. So the x minus 1 is already there, so I need to add the x plus 1, and that is coming from this other factor. Okay, so now I have my least common denominator. Now step number 2 is I'm going to multiply each fraction by the missing part. So my left fraction has x minus 1. It needs x plus 1. Top and bottom technically here, and I'll do that multiplication next. Middle fraction doesn't have anything, so I'm multiplying it by x minus 1 and x plus 1, which technically is my x squared minus 1 because I already factored that. And then the right fraction already has everything, so I don't need to multiply it by anything. So that is step 2. Step 3 is FOIL or distributive property. So now I'm bringing this down. And remember, technically, I multiply top and bottom there. So all three denominators at this point have exactly the same thing. So I'm going to my top left, the middle fraction, and then the right fraction. And now I have all of my denominators going to clear out. They're going to eliminate because all three are the same, and if all three are the same, then they cancel. So now I'm going to use the distributive property here. So 5x squared plus 5x. That should look familiar from Tuesday's Zoom. And then these two FOILed together is going to become x squared minus 1, x plus 1, minus 1, minus 1, and that again is coming from there. So I'm going to end up distributing that to my negative 3. Okay, so now I'm doing the distributive property again here. Just copying down the rest of my problem. So negative 3 times x squared is negative 3x squared. Negative 3 times negative 1 is a plus 3. And then on the right side I have 2x plus 5. So again, I'm going to add my like terms. So I recognize that I have 5x squared and negative 3x squared, which gets me 2x squared. I'm going to bring my negative 2x to the left side because it is a quadratic and it needs to be set equal to 0. So I'm subtracting 2x from 5x, so that gives me plus 3x. And then I have my plus 5 on the right side of the equation, so I'm going to subtract my 5 to the left side. So that side is gone. I have a quadratic. Now we're going to factor. And again, it looks like the box method because I have a 2 out front and a negative 2 over here. Some of you guys were doing guess and check, which you can do. You just have to make sure that you check because some of you guys were not checking. So box method, multiplying negative 2 times 2 gets me negative 4x squared. Factors of negative 4x squared, that add to be my middle term, and my middle term is 3x. So negative 1x and 4x, negative 2x and 2x. Okay, so AC method, top left box is my A, bottom right box is my negative 2. It looks like the winning 2 are going to be negative 1 and 4. So negative 1x and 4x goes in the other two boxes. And then I'm just GCFing my way out of this. So GCF top, GCF bottom, that's my first factor. Going vertically here, I have 2x, and then it looks like negative 1 in common. Now we are solving, so you're going to set each part equal to 0. So x plus 2 equals 0, so x equals negative 2. 2x minus 1 equals 0, add 1, divide by 2. So my two answers are negative 2 and positive 1/2. So now I have to go back and check my excluded values. And the excluded values are coming from my denominator up top. So I'm going to slide back up here and check for excluded values. So from the denominator, I have that x cannot be plus or minus 1, and that's coming from x minus 1 equals 0 and x plus 1 equals 0. So now I'm going to go back and double check against what I got, and clearly neither one of those answers are 1 or negative 1. So there are my two solutions. So that one looked a lot like the question that we had done together, just the factoring wasn't quite as intense. And then I'm going to lighten up a little bit more on the factoring here and just make sure you guys are getting least common denominator for the next question. So this is question number 3. So x minus 24 over x equals 5. So I'm going to put the x over 1. I'm going to put the 5 over 1 just so that I have all the same denominators. So the least common denominator is 1 and x. So this one's nice and easy. I don't have a lot to multiply by. So I'm going to multiply my left fraction by x. Middle fraction I don't have to multiply by anything. And the 5 on the right side I also have to multiply by x. So least common denominator is x, so now I have left fraction, middle fraction, right fraction, all have my least common denominator. So now I'm just going to do this multiplication. So x times x is x squared. Don't have to multiply that by anything. And then my right fraction I have 5 times x, which is 5x. My least common denominators all cancel because they're all the same. So then I'm just coming down here and doing the math. So I don't have any like terms to add, so I get to skip step number 4, but I do have a quadratic, and the quadratic needs to be set equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 5x, which is going to be my middle term. So I get x squared minus 5x minus 24 equals 0. And right here I'm just putting this in standard form because it is a quadratic. Now I'm at my factoring step. This is the easy factoring, thank goodness, because I have a single x squared. In the previous example we had a 5 out front, then we had a 2 out front, so I had to do the box method. But on this it's the easy factoring. So I'm looking for what multiplies to be negative 24 that adds to be negative 5. So negative 2 and 12, negative 3 and 8, negative 4 and 6. And it looks like it's going to be negative 3 and 8 that add to be 5. However, my middle term is a negative, so I'm going to change this to a plus and the 8 to a negative. So now I'm going to have x plus 3 and x minus 8. So now we're solving. So x plus 3, set that equal to 0. And x minus 8, set that equal to 0. And I'm running out of room, so I'm going to bring it over here. So x equals negative 3, and x equals a positive 8. Go back to my original equation and check my excluded values. And the only excluded value that I have is x cannot be 0 because there's no number being added to or subtracted from x. And I check it against my answer, and neither one of those are it. So all is well there. Okay, so now you guys have 3 examples. I'm going to give you one example to try on your own. And when you guys are done with this example, I will be sharing the answer with you guys on that one later in the week. Okay, so this one is for you to try on your own. It should give you a nice, easy linear equation. I'm about to give you a nice, easy linear one. Two over x minus 10 minus 3 over x minus 2 equals 6 over x squared minus 12x plus 20. Okay, and I will check back in with you guys on Friday, give you the answers, make sure all is well.